유럽에서는 또 흑사병이 일어났어요. 흑사병으로 많은 유럽 사람들이 죽으니까 유럽 사람들이 유럽에 있는 그 유대인들 또 많이 죽였습니다. 흑사병하고 유대인하고 무슨 관계가 있었길래 유럽 사람들이 이렇게 유대인들을 많이 죽였죠?
There was no Bible for the people to read. They couldn't read it anyway because they didn't know how to read. They only knew what the priest told them. So many times the sermons were the Jews killed Christ, the Jews killed Christ. They're bad people. They did all these terrible things, and God is judging them. They're under the curse of God. Well, if you sit there and hear this every Sunday, week after week after week after week, after a while that's going to get down into your spirit, and you're going to act that out. You're going to go try to find a Jewish person and hurt them. And so throughout Christian history, from time to time, there would be these mob outbreaks of Christians against their Jewish neighbors. It's a terrible thing to say, particularly around Passover, because this is when Jesus is crucified and buried, and I might add resurrected. During Passover, when European Christendom in times past would have the sermon on the death of Jesus, they always would say, the Jews killed Christ, the Jews killed Christ. Well, the congregation is going to get upset with Jews because they killed our Lord. So they're going to go out and find a bunch of Jews and try to kill them. I was reading a survey recently that in the United States, it said that a third of the of Americans believe today that the Jews killed Jesus. This hasn't changed much, you know. And so during Passover particularly, they'd have these anti-Semitic actions. But down through history, into the Inquisition in Spain and Portugal, in the 1400s and the 1500s, and for several centuries after that, when the Jews were forced out of Spain and came to the New World, the Sephardic Jews, Spanish Jews is the idea, came to the New World and came to Central America, South America, Mexico, and into the southwestern states of the United States. And unfortunately, the Inquisition followed them to the New World. Christopher Columbus, his real name is Chris Colon. He was a Jew. This would shock most American people and people of the world to know that the guy who discovered America in 1492, he left during the Inquisition. And all of his most important shipmates were Jews. His map makers were all Jews. He had a Jewish translator on the ship with him in case he ran into the scattered Jews that he was looking for to help them get back to their ancient land. And so throughout history, you've had these terrible anti-Semitic things.
15세기, 16세기에 스페인에서는 종교 재판이 일어났습니다. 물론 그 종교 재판의 대상은 유대인들이었죠. 왜 이 스페인 사람들이 거기에 있는 유대인들을 향해서 종교 재판을 했고 또 그 종교 재판의 결과가 어떻게 됐습니까?
The Spanish Inquisition was a terrible time in the history of the Jewish people. And the King and Queen of Spain were devout Catholics. And it was their desire to force all the Jewish people to convert to Catholicism. But they gave them a choice. They could either convert, they could leave, or they would be killed. Not much of a choice. And so during this time, Spain was the empire of the world. If people don't know much about history, they don't see God at working in all this. But Spain had long ago replaced Rome. Now Spain is the world empire. The reason why they are the world empire is because of their ships. Before airplanes, whoever controlled the seas controlled the world. And Spain had the greatest armada of ships in the world. And so they were the superpower of their day. But they had this issue that they wanted the Jews to convert to Catholicism. Well, the history of Christianity with the Jewish people, you can't blame the Jews for not wanting to do that. You've been killing my ancestors for centuries, and now you want me to join you and be one of you guys? No. So you had the decree from the King and Queen of Spain. You either convert and become Catholic, you leave, or we'll kill you. These were the three choices. So every Jewish person had to decide what to do. Many of them were tortured horribly because trying to make them confess Catholicism. And many of them died because they said the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. They would not convert to Catholicism. They were tortured terribly. I might also add that the Protestants who were in Spain were also tortured because they wouldn't convert to Catholicism. It was not just the Jewish people, but also the Protestant Christians who didn't follow the Catholic teachings. They also were persecuted terribly. So a Jewish person had the choice, convert, die, or leave. So again, many were tortured, trying to make them convert to Catholicism, but many would not do that. Others chose to convert to save their life. I'm not going to judge them at all. How would I know what I would do if I was them? But secretly, they maintained their Jewishness. Outwardly, they became Catholics, but secretly, they still did their best to keep the Sabbath. It's about all they could do. Tried not to eat pork and stay Jewish. But the Catholic leaders were so zealous to make sure they really had converted, they would spy on them all 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to make sure they weren't going into their house and doing something Jewish. So it was a terrible time for the Jewish people during the Inquisition. So the Jews, under great pressure. I might add also that during this time, that the main financial leaders in Spain were Jews. The treasurer of the Spanish bank was a very wealthy Jewish man. The financial advisor to the king and queen was a Jewish man. So they were very prosperous in Spain. The Jews had prospered in Spain. And one reason Spain prospered, because the Jewish people were there and were blessed by God being there. But when the king and queen turned on them, they stole the money from the Jewish people. This is how they got the money to pay for Christopher Columbus's voyages. They stole the money, confiscated from the wealthy Jews that made Spain prosperous. And so it was a terrible time. But think about this, Brad. God says, I will bless those that bless the Jews and curse those who curse them. As long as Spain was good to the Jewish people, Spain prospered. And the Jewish people prospered in Spain. But when the king and queen turned against them and forced these terrible things on the Jewish people, what happened? Here again is God working in history. Judgment and blessings, blessings and curses.
유대인들을 향한 학살은 전 세계에 걸쳐서 전 세계 여러 나라에서 계속 일어났습니다. 참으로 안타까운 일인데 19세기에도 러시아에서 유대인들을 향한 대학살, 포그롬이라고 그러죠. 포그롬이 일어났어요. 왜 또 러시아에서는 이렇게 유대인들을 향한 포그롬이 일어나는 것입니까?
So they would move from nation to nation, from the east to the west, from the west to the east, and trying to find a safe haven for their communities. And part of that was moving to the east, where they were in Poland and neighboring countries. So in the 1800s, when Russia, who's the neighbor of Poland and Eastern Europe, started wanting to take more land and invaded Poland and her neighbors that were on her eastern border, on her border, all of a sudden, the Tsar found himself with this huge population of Jewish people that he didn't want. He didn't like them. And so they're now part of the extended Russian Empire. He doesn't want them. Same story they faced so many times before. So again, the same issues they have. Convert to Russian Orthodoxy, die or leave. These are your choices. And what kind of choice is this, you know? And so the Russian military started persecuting the Jewish people. The Russian word is pogrom. It means devastation or persecution. And there was an area in geography that's called the Pale of Settlement. And this is the area where the Jewish people, most of them lived, like in the Ukraine today. There's having problems in the Ukraine, again with Russia and the Ukraine. And there's a Jewish population. And so in the 1800s, the Russian military started having these pogroms against the Jewish people. And during that time, many Jews fled and went to what's called Palestine by the Romans, but it's the land of Israel, before Israel was born as a state in 1948. Many of these Jews fled the Russian-controlled territory and went to Palestine. Many of them came to the United States of America. There's an area up in a little island in New York called Ellis Island, and it's a famous place in America. This was the place where immigrants would stop, and they would see the Statue of Liberty. And this little island called Ellis Island is where the immigrants would be processed, make sure they could be welcome into the United States at that time. Many of them were Jews. So many Jews fled the Russian pogroms and went to Palestine, or Israel as it would be called. God always called it Israel in the Bible. You won't find the word Palestine in the Bible. There's no such place. There's no such thing as a Palestinian people. Don't say any of these things hateful, but it's all a myth to take the land away from its rightful owners, the Jewish people. So let me say there's never been a Palestinian state anywhere. There's no such thing as a Palestinian people. Jerusalem has never been the capital of any Arab state in all of history. The only people that have been in that land, and from the time of King David to 1948, it was never anybody's state but a Jewish state. Wow. Very few people in the world know these historical facts. It's always been a Jewish state. It was a no man's land when Turkey was the Middle Eastern Empire from 1517 to 1917. And when the Turkish Empire fell apart at the end of World War I, this land was just there. Nobody owned it. It was just unoccupied, desolate land. And whoever would go there and work it, they're the ones who are the owners of it. It was the Jews who did that because God called them back. But as far as the Russian pogroms, the Jews fled west, escaping the Tsar, right into Hitler's ovens and the Holocaust in World War II.
예수님이 하늘로 승천하신 지 2000년이 됐습니다. 그리고 또 2000년 만에 이스라엘이 다시 세워졌어요. 그런데도 아직까지도 이 반유대주의가 사라지지 않고 또 최근 들어서 유럽에서는 반유대주의가 더 극성이고 있습니다. 왜 이렇게 반유대주의가 사라지지 않는 것일까요?
European Christendom, again, had this anti-Semitic theology against the Jewish people. And so, unless your heart has been transformed to have a love for God and for a Jewish Lord, so many Christians, they don't think about the fact that Jesus is a Jew. They wouldn't persecute Jewish people if they fully understood Jesus is a Jew. But they think of him as a Western person, you know. And so Jews killed Christ. It's this theology. They're evil. They deserve to be persecuted. They run the world, you know. All these fabricated theories and myths and ideas that are made up against the Jewish people. None of them are true, but it doesn't matter if they're true or not. If you have hatred in your heart, truth doesn't matter to you. You're going to do whatever you're going to do. And so the nations of the world still hate the Jewish people. Today, as we're having these interviews, we see anti-Semitism rising everywhere. I read a recent report just today, I believe, that anti-Semitism in the Netherlands is up 21%. That's huge. And on the college campuses in America, there's so much hatred against the Jews taught. Nobody would think this after the Holocaust, you know, just 70 years later. But the fires of hatred against the Jewish people is spreading around the world. And even when Jews have felt comfortable in Western nations, they're beginning to realize that this is not their final destination. They need to make aliyah or return to their ancient homeland. So I just want to say, in spite of the designs of evil people to hurt the Jewish people, God will override that and even use that to cause them to have a longing for their ancient homeland. And in Ezekiel 39:28, God says, I will leave none of them behind among the nations. God is going to bring the Jewish people back to their ancient land, because that's the place of his greatest blessing for them.
박사님 말씀을 들어보니까 참 전 세계 여러 민족 중에서 이 유대 민족만큼 고난의 역사를 가진 민족이 또 있을까 싶을 정도로 참 가슴 아픈 일들이 많았었는데, 한국에는 유대인들이 많지 않아요. 그래서 우리가 유대인들을 만나면 뭔가 좀 위로를 해주고 싶지만 한국에서는 유대인들을 만날 수가 없습니다. 그 대신에 우리가 이스라엘과 유대인들을 위해서 기도할 때 이런 비극적인 역사를 알고 난 이후에 하나님께 뭐라고 기도를 하면 좋습니까?
The best thing that Christians can do for the Jewish people is to love them unconditionally. And whether you have very many Jewish people in your country or not, you have some. And whoever they are and wherever they are, you need to go to them and say, we love you, we want to stand with you, we want to be your brothers, we want to support you and help you in your world, in your life. Outside of that, you have the calling from God in Psalm 122 says to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. But most people don't know that word pray in Hebrew means so much more than just say, God, please help the Jews. It's actually an active word that means to do something to bring the good to Jerusalem. So it's an action. It's not just, oh Lord, help the Jews. It's what can I do to help the Jews? That's what it means to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Now, anybody can look this up and study it and figure it out themselves. So it means, what can I do to help bring good to Jerusalem and help the Jewish people around the world. Certainly encouraging the Christians in Korea to pray for the Jewish people and actively seek ways to help them around the world is using the gifts God has given you to do that. But also, wherever and whenever you might hear hatred spoken against the Jews, don't be silent. Stand up and speak against that. If you have to have rallies, if you have to have parades and demonstrations and marches, if there's a Israeli embassy in Korea, go and have a pro-Israel rally in front of it and sing Hebrew songs and let them know you love them and stand with them. Make a connection there. And then find organizations around the world that you can trust that are working with the Jewish people to help them make aliyah back to the land, or giving into the land to help in humanitarian aid. You have to have wisdom and ask God to show you who to connect with and work with. You have to be led by the Lord, but find ways to help with humanitarian aid in the land of Israel. Encourage Christians to go to the Feast of Tabernacles and celebrate. My wife and I have been taking tour groups for 25 years to the Christian celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem. I was honored to be a speaker there for 18 years. And so Zechariah in chapter 14-16 says, in the latter days, all the nations will come up to Jerusalem and worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot. So I would encourage you to use the leadership role you have to encourage Christians to go to Jerusalem with a tour group and celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem. This is a major thing that you can do. So it's working with the Christians more than with the Jewish community, encouraging them to see God's everlasting covenant and that the land is part of that covenant, and speaking the truth against the lies that the nations are saying about who owns the land and the lies and deceptions that are said about Israel. No nation is perfect, but Israel is the only nation in the Middle East that has freedom for its citizens, freedom for equal rights for women, equal rights. I mean, the minorities in Israel have high positions in the land, in all areas of society, and encourage people to know what's really happening in Israel. Many of the medical technology advances that we have today helping people with their health issues come from Israel. Most of the computer technology comes from out of Israel today. So if you hate Israel, then don't use your cell phone anymore. don't use your computer anymore. Don't go to the doctor and get some of the advanced help for your medical issues. God says that Israel will be a blessing to the whole world, not just the redemptive Jesus spiritual part, but all the technology. They're helping farmers in drought-stricken areas learn about using drip irrigation, how to bring water into the desert, how to help people all over the world with their health issues, the technology issues. Israel is not perfect. No country is, but considering its situation, it's the only country in the world where the Christian population is growing. So education, Brad, to the Korean Christians is very important.
저는 리처드 부커 박사님의 책을 이미 읽어서 대략적으로 그동안 유대인들이 얼마나 많은 고난을 받아왔는지 알고는 있었지만 오늘 이렇게 또 직접 박사님으로부터 자세하게 이야기를 듣고 보니까 정말 고생을 많이 한 민족이구나. 정말 누구보다도 우리 크리스찬들의 위로와 사죄와 치유가 필요한 민족이 아닌가 이런 생각이 들었습니다. 모르고 기도하는 것보다도 이렇게 알고 기도하는 것이 중요하지 않을까 싶고요. 또 오늘 리차드 부커 박사님께서 이 유대인들이 당한 고난의 역사에 대해서 이야기하실 때 어떤 부분에서는 본인 스스로 목이 메이고 또 눈가에 눈물이 촉촉히 적시는 것을 저는 분명히 목격했습니다. 그만큼 이스라엘을 또 유대 민족을 사랑하시는 분인 것 같습니다. 오늘 리차드 부커 박사님으로부터 듣게 된 유대 민족의 고난사 우리에게 많은 공부가 됐던 것 같고요. 이렇게 긴 시간 동안 이야기해 주셔서 너무 감사합니다. 고맙습니다, 박사님.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
God bless you.